call the first emoji to the stand.
First of all, I'd like to say thank you to the love of my life, Abel. Alright, I'll start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Hello, we think this debate doesn't happen retrospectively. It happens at the point where JT doesn't know how this is going to pan out. By JT, I mean John Trengove. We think this is important in this debate because we're going to show you why the risks necessarily do not have factored into, or instead have factored into this when making this decision, why it's in his best interest that he sells the script, right? So importantly, like what we characterize as like controversial scenes within the scene. We think controversial scenes will be scenes that they express teachings and things that happen in initiation. Because this is valuable because when we're speaking about like the initiation ceremony itself, like the sacredness is known to the director, but it's also known to everyone. That is to say that at the point where the director makes a decision to pursue this endeavor, they want to know what the reception is going to be like. We think necessarily like, we think this could be like twofold, but we're going to show you what's in this case, right? So who is John Trengove within this debate? John Trengove will be a relatively unknown director who's not Xhosa. We think this is a good description of who he is as compared to what we get for Fumane, who's more an accomplished director. We will show you that why also Fumane is better place to be to make this movie as an accomplished director. So what do you know again? We assume that he wants to make more films in the future. This assumption is based on the fact that creative abilities are built on the ability to have to do or want to do more other films in the future. That's to say that at a point where someone is relatively unknown, that becomes rather risky for them. I'm going to tell you why in our analysis. So like, why should he sell? So we recognize the sacred nature of the subject matter. We believe that he also recognizes the sacred nature. And in making a film like this, a lot goes into it. We think JT had to engage with traditional leaders, had to engage with people, and find out about these rituals. In doing that, he then finds out how it is important to these people and how best to represent it in this instance. We think at the point when he makes a creative decision to go have another controversial scenes, like have explicit scenes where the teachings are like kind of we make it known that like within this particular framework, the reason why these things are meant to know is because they're sacred. There's sort of a thing, a sacred tradition where things that are said there remain there, the teachings there are explicit to the people that were there. We think at that point he knows that he's taking this. Why do we necessarily think that he is not best placed to take the risk and therefore why he should have sold the script, right? We tell you that like the first movie for a director we don't think should be like the most controversial. This is an assumption that every director wants to create other movies, right? We don't think that Eminem's first song should be him saying the N-word, because that like changes how we view him in the future, changes how his music is consumed, right? We think if you want to continue to make new films, you don't have to necessarily also have to like be in this particular category. What does this do for him when his first movie becomes controversial? We think when someone's first movie or first endeavor of art becomes a controversial thing, it's tied to them always. This is at the point where he wants to make another form of media, we still recognize him as the person that did this. We see this in music all the time, like say for example, Tyler the Creator, like was still tied to the things he said under Art Future, even though he makes like different songs today. We think if he wants to create more media and wants to like involve change and involve specific type of feeling in his movies, like we think it's better for him to sell the script and then find it for like a movie that's maybe less controversial or maybe not within the realms of this, right? It's like, why does Fumane essentially become this person that she sells? We tell that Fumane is an accomplished director. What comes with an accomplished director? Someone who's our producer, someone who's like worked with other movies before or worked with other films before. That's to say that the perception going into movies for this person is like vastly different. Like even on the status quo, these things exist with regard to like artistry. Like Jason Wallace's first art piece, like might have not been like the best thing, but like when Jason Wallace's first art piece first art piece might have been something that is, like because he's accomplished, and we're likely to accept more of like stuff that might not be good. We think that's an important framework within this movie. Another thing that an accomplished director might use is to assume the director assumes more risk for this. We think at the point where someone is an accomplished director, like they can have more risky work out there in the world because it doesn't directly tarnish their image, because they have like these sort of discussions. I'll take.
Okay, can I ask, do we assume that John Trengove wants success, or is he okay with just true artistic expression?
Again, even if like true artistic expression becomes the case, we think you become severely limited in your future work by the inability of this. We see this all the time, like creative directors who take out a loan to like or movie producers who take out a loan to like create a movie. Once that movie flops, you can't just like creatively direct it out. Like these things need to like for you to be able to like make the second thing, which might be a creative endeavor for you, like are contingent on the first thing that you built, right? So as I was saying, like we think like importantly within this debate, we think risk is not necessarily placed more on directors than writers. I think Christopher Nolan in this particular world is known for like his movies, but don't really know the writers for these particular things. That is to say, the writers can always claim that they worked on Christopher Nolan movies and assume the specific type of benefits that come from it. But no, the writers don't necessarily always have to take the risk that work on this space. When a movie flops, usually producers and the directors are the persons that go for. This is important within the framework of this debate because JT can have this thing, can have the movie play out with regard to like how the controversial or less controversial scenes are, and rather like assume the risk if the movie pans out. If the movie goes bad for him, we see that his reputation becomes tarnished as a producer, as a director, even as a writer. That is to say, if JT wants to venture and maybe go into writing or more explorative pieces of art or more explorative pieces of media, he cannot do that because again, that movie becomes the defining moment of his career. And note that like, in this discussion, it doesn't matter, like the JT at this point does not know how this movie is going to pan out. We tell you that like in every discussion of creative endeavors, like it's only dependent on what the first thing is. We think like there's examples where people like get on the first or the third try or rather. And we think that's an anomaly with regard to things that happen. Usually in creative endeavors, if you fail with that the first story, that becomes what you look for. We think in this particular game, we want to hear a discussion about like he knew that or rather like he knew how this was going to be done because like it does not happen retrospectively. And I think an important distinction with this is to say that when John Trengove becomes essentially the better person to make this movie and assume that risk because he's more able to like assume the risk that comes from that. And for that, I've never been more proud to propose.
I'll be starting in 3, 2, 1. And we think when we look at art artists like Kanye West, whose first song was controversial and his latest song was controversial, we think controversy isn't inherently or the only thing that can limit a person's career, right? But firstly, if I'm going to engage OG at their base, I think it's kind of weird that they want to come tell us that this isn't a retrospective motion, but then proceed to tell us about things that are going to happen in the future. We think if you're going to talk about things that happen in the future, we can also talk about things that happened in the past. They concede to the fact that John Trengove went out of his way to learn about the Xhosa culture and to learn about these sacred things, right? We think that when Xhosa people tell you, listen, this is sacred to us, this is important to us, and he still makes a movie, he knew exactly what he was doing. We think when he knows that he's making something controversial, we think the purpose of him making this movie is to create discourse, is what we value on our side, right? Cool. We also think then, if you, JT is the type of person that actually cares about art, that cares about the culture, whereas Steven is somebody that cares about box office success, somebody that cares about money. This is inherently harmful, and I'll get into it on my matter, right? Then they come up here and tell us, like, listen, JT's first movie shouldn't be controversial, it shouldn't be something that, that's the first thing that he produces, and they come up and tell us that, listen, a more established artist can have a more controversial movie. I think firstly, such a movie shouldn't be put out by a director who didn't go out of their way to educate themselves about the Xhosa culture. We think Steven didn't go into these communities, Steven didn't do the research, and therefore Steven's name shouldn't be on the movie, especially since it's such a controversial movie. We think on their side, the movie still exists, it's just going to be under a different name. We think this is harmful towards the Xhosa people, it's harmful towards the Xhosa culture, and it's harmful towards the discourse that we are trying to create. We think they don't create a better world on OG. What do we then tell them? Firstly, I'm going to be speaking about how, one, it portrays the portraying of Xhosa culture and portraying about deep things about the Xhosa culture should be done in a way that's appreciative for art and the Xhosa culture and not for money and commercialization. Secondly, then I'm going to be speaking about how this selling the script is going to be shifting the conversation, which is not what we want, because on our side, we value active discourse. Before that, a little bit of contextualization of why we value art in the first place. First, we think we value art, we value movies, one, because it's a form of expression and it's a form of creation and it challenges people and creates conversations. We think this is something that we value within society because this is how we progress, this is how we talk about things that are taboo, this is how we critique culture, the importance of culture and critiquing it. We think Africans should be open towards speaking about their culture, should be open towards critiquing their culture and saying, listen, it's okay for us to talk about these things, it shouldn't be taboo. We think these things are important and ought to be valued in today's debate. A little bit of characterization about the nature of the script that we're going to be getting, right? We think it's going to be showing us the deeper parts of the Xhosa culture. It's going to be showing us the deeper parts of how people are interacting with each other, right? Most importantly, we think because it's showing the deep parts of Xhosa culture, it's important for us to have appreciation of it and not commercialization of it. We think this is something that OG and actually the entire government bench should speak about and why it's something that we need to value. I'm not taking you. And then I've already spoken to you about the value of controversial movies. It creates discourse. Cool. So then I'm going to be speaking about my first point about portraying the Xhosa culture. We think already I've explained to you that this type of movie is showing deep things. It's showing the rituals where they go up to the mountains where a Xhosa boy becomes a man. We think these things are sacred to the Xhosa people. We think when it's portrayed out into a world in a movie, it should be portrayed in its entirety. That is to say, a person shouldn't be able to nitpick parts of the script that they think might be controversial and take it out so that it is more palatable. We think when it's palatable, you're not speaking true towards the Xhosa people, you are actively harming them. We think if you can portray the Xhosa people without actively harming them, by portraying it in its entirety, by portraying it for the love of the art and not for the love of money, I'll take it. Yes.
Okay, so Elano came out in 2017. Can you describe how discourse of Xhosa culture and masculinity has changed?
We think when a Xhosa man is a Xhosa man, they think as a Xhosa man, I could never be gay, right? Xhosa men have this idea that, listen, you're portraying a Xhosa culture and you're portraying it as same sex. We think this is the type of discourse that we value. We want Xhosa people to be comfortable with Xhosa people being gay, right? We think people in African cultures are always like, if you're a real African man, you cannot be gay. This is the conversation that we value. This is the conversation that comes out of such movies. But it only comes out of such movies when the Xhosa traditions are shown in their entirety without nitpicking certain scenes that you think may be controversial. We think the palatableness of Steven's portrayal of JT's movie is something that we ought not value. Cool. Secondly, then my second point of how to shift the conversation. I've already explained to you the importance of discourse and the importance of conversation, but then we need to value the right conversation. At a point in which JT wants to sell this movie to Steven, the conversation then becomes about, was this a good idea? Is it good for JT to sell this movie to about gay people in African cultures? Are we actually talking about what happens in the mountains? Are we actually talking about what JT had intended for us to talk about in the first place? We think this conversation shift creates discourse that isn't valuable. We think we want discourse to be valuable, we want discourse to be about something that actually has long-lasting impact on little Xhosa children who want to be gay, right? We think we ought to prioritize a conversation that is actually going to move us forward, and not a conversation that is talking about sellouts, not a conversation that's talking about whether it's going to get box office acclaimity, right? So then we think then that's also something that we think is not valuable, and that's why he ought not sell the script. Another thing that we think we need to talk about is how we do not value box office success if it's not being true towards JT's vision. What does this mean? Right? We think our government is going to tell us that, listen, we want discourse, but we want it on a larger scale. We want it to be commercialized. We want people to actually see this movie. First, let me tell you, we don't value box office success. We don't value the commercialization of JT's movie if it isn't being true to what JT had intended. We think these deleted scenes are not being shown, and therefore we don't value the discourse. We think the deleted scenes, the things that make people uncomfortable, the things that make people want to start talking, are what we ought make commercialized. We think even though JT's movie doesn't have as much critically acclaim, or JT's movie doesn't have as much funding, we still value it because the discourse it creates doesn't only have to happen because people sat down and saw the movie. We think not a lot of us actually went and saw the movie, but we know what it's about, we know what the discourse is about, we know what the conversation is about, and therefore we still value it. We think on our side, we actually have art being art. We actually have art fulfilling the role that it needs to fulfill in society. But furthermore, we have somebody who is portraying Xhosa culture in its entirety, appreciating it instead of appropriating it for money, right? But secondly then, we think we're better for JT on our side because he gets to be true to himself. He gets to portray a movie that he wanted to, that he went out of his way to learn about the Xhosa people so that he could portray this movie. We think this is exactly what he wanted. He knew what he was doing. Panel, you have no choice but to opt for the house that actually cares about art, discourse, JT, and the Xhosa people. I've never been proud.
We thank that speaker and would like to call the Deputy Prime Minister to the stand. Thank you.
Before I start, I would marry you, right? Okay, I'm going to start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Okay. The reason why opening opposition cannot win this debate is because they fail to understand the responsibility that an artist has to themselves. As much as you're controversial, or as much as like you're not the biggest or most popular artist, your main objective or your main intention is to be able to make movies again. What they don't understand about the art industry is that you need to get sponsorship, you need to get funding. When you're an established artist, you are able to continue all of these things outside of like the reviews that you get. So we think backlash here becomes a very important thing because it allows for you to continue your career. At a point where you are unknown or you're not very popular, non-Xhosa, they don't give us arguments as to why you as an individual have the responsibility to initiate this controversy or this conversation that they value so much, that brings the discourse that most people in this room like do not engage in or do not participate in. We don't think they provide us with benefits that are inherent to like this producer. We tell him that it's a harm because to his career, he will be that producer that made that controversial movie. He will be that producer that makes that controversial movie. We don't think this is inherently beneficial to his career. This is like something we need to like consider heavily in this conversation. There are two things I'm going to like tell you in this debate. The first thing I'm going to talk to you about the importance of experience in like the industry of film, and I'm also going to talk to you about like the importance of like artistic expression and where artistic expression is like better off, and also the last thing should just be like a chat on where the artist himself is best off. To start off with like the whole importance of like artistic expression, I'm going to like have a lot of my rebuttals in the end. I'm going to show you that within like the impacts that I made with the argument. There are certain things that we need to understand here. You're an upcoming artist, be it a rapper, be it a dancer or whatever. We don't think the first thing that you make should be controversial. Even if you are going to be a controversial artist in the future. Why exactly is this important? Especially in the film industry. Because most of the funding you make, you like are able to get from movies comes from other people and other support. Even at a point where you have all of these things, we don't think the direction for you as an individual should be that because you want to make things in the future. Why exactly is this bad even when you have the funding? Because once there is backlash at you, people pull out from supporting you, even when they were rooting for you in the beginning. We think this is significantly important for you as an upcoming artist because even if you have controversial opinions or expressions that you want to put out to the world, people should engage with them. People don't engage with them when there's like backlash on your stuff because nobody will want to be associated with you. Why is this important? The fact that like Adidas did not care about Kanye anymore, or like moved away from him once he became a very big artist is evident of this in like reality. These things happen. Netflix will pull your stuff out because you are not within their brand. People do these type of things and they think this is real. This is like real to status quo, and you need to. This is like real to status quo, and you need to make that consideration of who you are as an artist in this type of situation. This is different for the established artists because there are two things that he does that the info slide provides us with that is important to the outcome of this debate. What he does is he removes these controversial and we think this is an outcome unique to experience. We think the fact that he's able to assume, he's able to like predict that this is dangerous for a career of an upcoming artist. I as the producer is going to buy someone and change it is very important to what the movie is going to communicate. So even if the movie Inxeba is going to be about what it is about, there are certain things that will not be communicated. This is important because of this is important because of like the career of like the artist. And this is important to the career of the artist because when he gets credit, he's going to be credited as a writer. Even the director who makes this change will also be a writer because of the change that he makes to the script. The script is not going to be the exact same thing. You know, like those small edits and change matter in this conversation. But before I go to like the next point where I talk to you about like what artistic expression is and where it's better off, I'll take a POI from you.
Do you think that movies and art should only be created for art's sake or for money and career sake?
I think as an upcoming artist, there is no reason for you to like prioritize your artistic interest, and this is true for many artists. Jean-Michel Basquiat was not an artist who was recognized in his time, and we think this is something that we speak of as a harm because his art could have been something we would have that. His art is something we appreciate now. We think appreciation within your time is something every artist wants to experience. It's inherent to the fact that you make art. If you don't want appreciation, why are you painting? Like we think artists who do these type of things don't necessarily like care about the fact that they make the movie for themselves to watch it in like their rooms with their friends or what that need even the debate or the conversation to be happening. We think this conversation is about an artist who wants people to watch the movie. That's why you release it to the world. That's why you want people to engage and interact with it. You want people to see how you would express, you know, a particular thing or like a particular interest. You don't think you're able to attain that or you're able to achieve that interaction when you close it, when you like make something that is unique to you or something that is going to receive a lot of backlash from society. Okay, that is important. This will be tied to you in the future. So what is the conversation on expression? So we think when we speak about expression, you need to consider the fact that expression in the film industry, because it's not just you as an individual doing certain things, this is you in the film industry. This means that there are other people doing stuff similar to you, stuff that are like very different to you. We think the fact that there's like variation here is good, number one. Why exactly is this good? It means that certain people will take the risk that other people cannot take. This is important because it allows you as a person to be very safe and could like to basically like take risk where you can and where you cannot. We don't think this upcoming artist is in a position where he should take this risk, and that's why selling it is good because he's still able to get credit, but this credit is not for the entire movie. It's like for bits and parts of this movie, which will allow for him to like even if. This is just to say that even if like the harms or the consequence of this movie is like really horrible and nobody like watches it ever, he will be a writer who wrote a movie, okay? We will not necessarily know what part of the movie was associated to him, but he gets some sort of money here which allows him to do something else which is better than him being the only person who's tied to the movie and he gets nothing. Even if the benefit is minimal, it is still something that you don't necessarily like get from that type of like a debate. So who is the better person for JT? We think we care about JT and we think the best thing that JT should do is sell this movie simply because he gets something that does not exist in a world where nobody supports him, or where there's a lot of backlash. We think even where there is like a lot of like backlash around it. We think the controversy around this day, or the controversy that they speak about that is important for society, they don't give us arguments as to why it's something that should be exclusive from a person who is non-Xhosa. We don't see why that is like important. We don't necessarily see how society goes, so they don't give us analysis of how that is good, or why the discourse is so transformative to society that this person needs to be the person who releases these movies, that people need to see these like weird scenes and
they misunderstand the chat that we're trying to have today. We hope that like every other team here is getting on the same wavelength so we can have a good debate, right? But I'm going to show you that even in their case is fundamentally flawed because they fail to recognize to us why John is so incentivized to make money. Like on a fundamental point, they don't tell us like how we know that this is incentive. I'm going to prove to you how we know that money is not his incentive and that like truly that he actually cares about artistic expression. Do the job for them and let's start. Okay, firstly, what is this chat actually supposed to be about, right? This motion is actually supposed to be about what is the best way to get a message across, right? Either do we do it in a small way, right? So we concede that like yes, it doesn't have box office success, but it's highly criticized and that criticism creates discourse, or making it more palatable but like on a bigger stage, but like does that like it reaching more people reach those people, like it reaching more people create more discourse, right? It's not a conversation of like what John values. It's not a conversation about like John's career, and I'm going to show you why, right? OG's biggest chat is that like, oh, we ought to value John's career, we ought to value John as the most valuable actor. Firstly, they don't tell us why John is the most valuable actor here. They don't tell us like why they should be valued over people who go to initiation practices, who are harmed, who are in danger of like falling septic, and also can't be openly like gay in their cultures because we look down on toxic masculinity. We wish to have engaged that, right? But I tell you as well about John's best interest, right? That John clearly, in terms of proof, does not value money. Why doesn't he value money? He would have taken the money that was offered to him, right? This is a real life thing. It's not a hypothetical situation. John is a real person who got offered a massive check and declined the check. Why? Because he valued his artistic expression. He wanted it to stay true to what was being said. And no thinking, oh, actually, sure, I need to take it, sure.
Do you think Stephen Von Scher's can fundamentally alter the plot of the movie?
Oh, thank you for that. That's a good point, right? I think it's important for us to look at what controversial scenes looks like in this debate, right? Why are these scenes controversial and like what are being removed, right? We say that like people are even upset about the fact of displaying initiation processes to like such an extreme, to such an accurate view, right? So like they see it as like sacred and private, right? So that we say that like even like John showing that we go to the mountain and like people get circumcised in this weird way is seen as controversial because that's something that's private. So Stephen is going to want to hear out. Stephen is going to to want to take this part away, and we say that this is fundamental to the meaning of it, right? You're taking out like the message that this is a harmful practice. This is a practice that creates toxic masculinity. So when you take out these controversial things, you are changing the plot when the plot's objective is trying to show the harm of it, right? Okay. Then we get the idea that like controversial, like controversy limits your career in this massive way. We say that's not true because once again, by proof, we saw that he was given a bigger check because of this. Somebody actively wanted to work with him, and so people are still willing to accept your work when it's controversial. And we think, in fact, if this was the debate that we were having, it's not the debate that we were having. The controversy made it even better because why? It gave John name recognition. People aren't going to watch Inxeba, you know, because we don't support. Okay, but people weren't going to watch Inxeba because it's just another Xhosa story. People are watching Inxeba because it's controversial, because your Twitter friends are talking about it so much. Right? It is that made it so like contentious, and it is that he's like picking it up on, right? Okay, cool. Then there's the idea that like John holds no responsibility to these like Xhosa groups. This is where we start getting a bit contentious in OG's case, right? We said like John owes a responsibility to himself as somebody who wants to advocate for the most vulnerable actor, right? This was like, yes, let's say I want to go and make a movie about Palestinians, right, and Palestinian culture, and about like what's going on right now in Gaza, right? I don't know, I'm not Palestinian, like I don't have a responsibility to them because like, you know, I'm one of them. I have a responsibility to them because I'm an individual who values social justice. So being true to myself, being in social cohesion with myself is doing that, right? Okay, and then also we think that like the idea that like your first movie shouldn't be controversial. We said the movie's already been made, so if it's really ruining this thing, we're done with it, right? Okay, let's get onto our substantive matter, right? One thing that we're talking about is why we think it is better on our side is that we value a shock factor of these explicit scenes. We want them to stay there because we think that the shock factor is what was necessary for the discourse to come, right? So that we go out there, like the only reason why it got so famous on Twitter is because people have something to say about it. Is it right or wrong to show this private act, right? Or is it right or wrong like to show homosexuality in a context where everybody in that community is actively against it, right? We say that like in Stephen's case, right? All that happens that like we shift from that shock factor, we shift for that, and all we talk about is the fact that this man has like sold out. So the discourse then changes and goes from where these toxic communities, and it starts being about individuals who sell out, and whether that's a good or bad thing, right? Then we start talking about John, and we want to talk about that John, you know, not only is he appropriating black culture, but he's also selling out on the blacks, and then like this becomes like a problem in and of itself, right? But then we also said this is principally wrong because it creates a bad precedent, and it tells to artists that money is something that they ought to value, right? That this is something that you ought to do. Why is this something that happens, right? We show that it creates a practice in society where it's looked down upon to care about like your own, like it's looked down upon to care about a political messaging, like a social messaging, right? Because it's like, as OG does, they look down on John for like caring about the art and not the money. We say it is good to care about the art and it is good to not care about the money. It creates a precedent where we start valuing art for like what it's messaging, right? And this is a good thing in and of itself. Okay, and then we say that like the reason why this is something that is so important is because art is something that fundamentally moves society. We need art that is like going to break the bounds. We need artists who are going to care about the message instead of like caring about the monetary value, because this is the art that breaks the bones and this is the art that breaks the barriers, right? The art that like is just like a palatable form is not the art that's going to get us there. In fact, it's just going to be an art about people like Xhosa people and their traditional way. We say that like you can see this anyway. It's not making a change in society, right? What have we told you in our case, and why should we be like the winning case here, right? Because firstly, we told you that art is meant to be valued in the sense that like it portrays its messaging, right? We told you that like even if we are looking for the best interest of John, we cater for the best interest of John, and we cater for the best interest of the Xhosa people who are being like harmed in these like initiating actions and like toxic masculinity, right? And then, but furthermore, we told you that the shock value of discourse is what we value. We told you that box office success like is something that we don't value in society. Why? Because it takes away and it makes things palatable, and then we focus on the palatability and the show, and that instead of actually focusing on the discourse. I've never been proud of that.
Just wait until the
Okay. As a filmmaker and film distributor myself, I'm proud to have the opportunity to present an extensive extension on exactly why the South African and African fiction film market simply is not working, and how that can be traced back to the decisions made by the 2010s era directors and producers such as John Trengove, and how, if I had the opportunity to do better, I think John should have sold this film. Some has been to be a bit of an extension, but also engaging with the opposition case. What you have to realize is that this film could be a documentary, and selling the rights for a fiction film doesn't impair the opportunity for the story that opposition as an entire bench might want to tell. And South Africa actually has a good history of making amazing documentaries. My Octopus teacher won the Academy Award a couple of years ago for Best Documentary Around the World. Last year, Mtombeni was sold to international markets around the world as a documentary that exposed the realities of women in South Africa, I think. And then across Africa, there was a documentary released this year called The Homie, made by Matilda, where the first time an African woman has won one of the major awards at international festivals such as Fumane and Cannes, which are really great at making really good documentaries. Why are documentaries so effective? One, they look very real. So I'll give a Palestine example. A documentary that was released this year called No Other Land brought me and other audience members to our tears. We watched it in July because it was so raw. It's cheaper to make documentaries and you have more participation from that community. It's also very undeniable, so it's difficult for political opponents and for discourse to be about fictional elements of a documentary. Next, it comes with more advocacy because a lot of people create impact campaigns where they make sure that documentaries get played in schools, they get sold to educational institutions. Examples, right? And then I ask you, well, this guy couldn't have made this documentary because no one's allowed to film in these kind of areas. Well, we don't think that's necessarily true. Why can you get access? Firstly, a lot of filmmakers use creative means to get access. An example is Theatre of Violence, which we call it the entire trial of Dominic Ongwen. Scars of My People by Vincent Manoy, which is a 2015 documentary about the repatriation of scars to Namibia. And okay, sometimes it takes a long time. You know, Mother City, which came out this year about housing occupation in Cape Town, took 7 years to make. Our Freedom Our Land, which is a Kenyan film about how the Malatji fighters in Kenya were just removed from their land and harmed by colonization, took about 10 years to make. So yeah, maybe it would take a long time to make, but you eventually get that access if you're persistent as a documentary filmmaker. You just got so many examples. So ultimately, this entire film was based on a book called A Man Who's a Man, written by some guy called Tando. I don't really remember his surname. So it's a real story here that the film is anyway based on. You know, you can make a documentary and you can get all of their impacts. This is a debate about a fiction film and why we think this fiction film should have been a bit different in terms of its production. Some historical context. Fiction films in South Africa used to be amazing. Like Arnold Schmidt in 1988 directed a film called Mabatula, which went international. 2005, Govender directed Xhosa, which won the Academy Award for Best Foreign Film at the time. It's been a long time since a film from South Africa has even been shortlisted for the Academy Awards, like Lavery and yesterday were the last ones. But from the 2010s onwards, something sort of happened where South African fiction films were no longer taken seriously by South African audiences, by international audiences, by award ceremonies, by anyone, and that dip is contributed by the decisions to not sell films to competent producers like Stephen to ensure that these films are successful, that they're productive, and they achieve the impact that you want. Those are just really good films. I think most of us in the audience don't watch South African or African films anymore, right? So I think that's important. So thank you. So let's start this extension. The first question, I've got a few questions I want to ask. The first question is, what does the producer do, and how does that unfold in the filmmaking process? Because Stephen's not coming on as a director, they're coming on as a producer, and that's important. So the first thing a producer does is to consider the productive and the capacity of the film. This is whether our audiences are going to buy into the film. Secondly, whether the film is going to have impact, and whether it will produce credibility. A producer cares about this more than they care about making money, because the credibility of a film means that they'll be trusted in the future and with their networks to make future films. Examples of this is like when Brad Pitt produced 12 Years a Slave, it enabled him to get financing to produce other films, because 12 Years a Slave was a successful film. So they care not just in terms of making money, but in terms of impact and being considered to be a serious film and winning awards. So they care more about that. So I don't think the propaganda is a part of today's debate. Thirdly, they prioritize productivity over creativity. A creative team like a director or an actor or a writer is more concerned with telling their story and, you know, the kind of creative elements. But a producer doesn't care so about that part. They care about whether the story will succeed. And so they're able to make difficult decisions that make sure that audiences actually buy into the film over someone that just wants to sort of tell their own story. They think it's important. Then finally, they connect the creative team to partners in film that lead to that success. Like financiers, these are markets like LIP and different film that enable you to be connected to people who are going to fund your film. These are co-producers, like for instance, the film Atlantic by Matilda, the Seneliso film, was shot together with the Senegalese and the French government. So producers able to connect these two governments together. And then the distributors. So it's going to be your festivals, it's going to be your independent, your cinema chain, this is all going to be OTT, which is like streaming and broadcasting, multi-choice, ABC, one of those people. They connected to the market so that it actually succeeds. We know Stephen is successful and will be able to make sure that this film actually did succeed. Because we already know historically, the film didn't achieve wide recognition or even discourse. A producer would have been able to do that. Yeah, okay.
Okay, cool. So since producers only care about success and not the movie itself, they can cut out scenes. This is directly harmful to the Xhosa people. This is their same.
Okay, then make a documentary about the Xhosa people. You know, that everybody really engaged with that point. This is about whether or not this film succeeds, right? And we think that this film succeeds when the producer makes the sort of decision that makes it succeed. There's no point in making a wonderful film that no one sees. That's the comparative in today's debate. Okay, so then why do we have producers? One, because the creative team is unable to weigh the productive capacity of a film. B, because creative teams simply don't have the adequate network to ensure that their films succeed. C, because businesses don't trust creative teams because they know that those creative teams are too attached to a film. That's why Amazon has now pushed out to the African market. That's why Netflix and multi-choice showruns focus on making series instead of making fiction films because they have more control of the series. Because if you don't like one episode, you can tell the director to start correct. Right, so we think that a producer coming in means you have better distribution, you have better success of a film, and also you make a better film. Right? So what's so wrong with the fiction film production market in Africa? And why is John and other people responsible for that? And how do we fix it? That's the last thing I'm going to tell you. One, creative teams are not audience focused. They're not getting viewers the crowd here and making a film for you. They think too much about themselves. B, creative teams have very little experience. At least Stephen has a lot of experience. So he's able to make the film that will actually be seen by a lot of people, right? And I think these continuous mistakes means that people will not want to fund films. So when someone makes Masheane and another city was funded, but they didn't succeed, no one wants to fund serious films about Xhosa people. Because those are both films about Xhosa people, for instance, which didn't succeed. So ultimately we fixed that by bringing in Stephen, because he focuses on the market and distribution, making a fiction film actually a fiction film, leaning on their previous successes, and making sure people actually watch this film.
Thank that speaker and I'd like to call the first member from Prison of the Stand, Abel.
Okay, I'll be starting in 3, 2, 1. Let me engage governing bench as a whole before I get into our extension, right? Realize that OG takes a soft line by saying that they would rather Steve, an established producer, be the one who produces risky movies because that is going to be more acceptable, right? Right. Like the issue with that is that Steve is not likely to produce the controversial movie because they tell you that they're likely to remove the controversial scenes. So at best, they're producing a movie that they know everyone is going to like, but it is still going to remove the essence of why the movie was going to be created. So it is a soft line for you to understand that from that, from that side, right? Secondly, then you tell us that like JT didn't know of the success of it, and because of the lack of guarantee, that's why they shouldn't have done it, right? Realize that I don't think anyone who rejects a substantial amount of money given to them for them to give away a script cares actually about the success of anything or the movie of it. They care that they get their point across, or like the reason that they are producing the thing across, right? Secondly, then realize that CG tells you that they should have, by getting CGS, they tell you that they should have gotten someone else for better distribution because then that will get them a better audience, right? I think then that the backlash that the movie receives captures that audience anyway, because people are likely to still be interested in the function of the movie, right? The reason when I see a controversial headline about Fire and Bougie, I have to click on it to see what's happening is the same reason that people are going to want to find out what this big thing, is going to be centered around, right? Let's move on then to our extension, right? Okay, so we're going to provide you with an analytical extension on firstly why we think that people write and direct movies, but secondly then why we think what the incentive is for JT to have written and directed Inxeba, right? Let's look at the incentives that exist for people to write and direct movies, right? First, it's for entertainment purposes to make money, and that's what we get from governing bench, and they can have that. Secondly, then we think that the most important part, and that's what's been happening in the op bench, is about how it's going to drive discourse, right? But in extension, we give you how it's necessary for the recording of history, how it's necessary to tell an untold story, right? Let's look at then why we think the movie was necessary to record history, right? Let's look at what was happening when the movie was actually written and released, right? So that was 2017. What was happening then? Firstly, I would just like to establish that we don't think movies about sensitive topics or about people's cultures are written and directed with 5 weeks of work, right? We think that they normally take time, they normally take research, they normally take an investment in it, right? Why is this particularly important? It is particularly important because we need to realize why specifically 2017 is so was such an important time for this movie to have been written and directed then, right? This was the era of 2012 to 2017 was an era where we saw a rise of upsetting stories around initiation, right? What does this look like? It literally looks like the headlines every other week or every other month during the winter season where there's stories being told about initiation schools in KZN where we have 16 to 20 children either passing on or being harmed in terms of their health, right? Secondly, then we were having media outcries of parents saying that they don't know where their kids disappeared to, and they randomly came home after 5 or XYZ amount of weeks saying that no, they just got initiated, right? Because these kids went there without the consent of their parents because they were just tricked by the idea of wanting to buy into them becoming a man. So we think that verification of initiation schools existed during that time, and it was necessary then for the movie to have been released, right? Why do we think it was necessary then for the movie to have been released in that time, specifically to form part of the recording of history, right? We need to understand how movies work and how longevity within movies works, right? We think that movies provide you with a longevity and a permanence that other forms of media don't allow you to have, right? That is why we see that there are so many historical stories that exist, and yet those same stories are being turned into movies. We literally have a movie about Winnie Mandela's life solely because we know that the longevity of movies allows a permanent access to history that you don't get with other forms of media, because we think that no one is likely to search for an article that was released in 2016, but it's literally 2024 and we're talking about Inxeba, the movie currently. That's an access to history that you don't have if you're going to use other forms of media, and that it allows for that longevity to exist, right? Secondly, then let's look at why it was necessary to drive discourse, right? Realize opening opposition tells you the impacts of the discourse. We are about to provide you analytically prior how the discourse is likely to happen through movies as opposed to any other form of media, right? Firstly, we think that because the movie is controversial, it brings backlash, right? And as I've explained, this backlash brings an audience to the discussion, even if it doesn't bring the audience to the movie. So we saw with the low sales that yes, not many people are watching the movie, but we do have people being curious about the sensitive topic there, right? So realize that phrases there's no such thing as bad publicity are specifically applicable in this case. That regardless of the fact that people thought that the movie was too graphic and whatever, there's still people willing to do some research on it, right? So you have people looking into it, and that's how you get discourse, right? Secondly, then how do you get discourse? At the point where you have a controversial movies, you literally have an extensive investment in people actually creating reviews of this because they know people are unlikely to look at it because of the sensitivity and like the gruesome things that you're seeing there, right? What does this look like? It literally looks like people writing reviews and then like I guess like book clubs intellectually discuss that, right? But I think most importantly, it literally looks like what happens on Twitter where people then talk about their stories, right? Why is this particularly important and how do we think this was necessary to be a catalyst in driving models of discourse? Realize that the reason people don't speak about initiation schools or sensitive topics on Twitter is because they have the fear of being attacked personally. At the point where we're discussing a movie and you're sharing stories linked to controversies around the movie, you can share your experiences without your criticism, without people like, I guess, responding to you personally, but just engaging your contribution to that movie. So we think we have better drive of discourse there and like we value the impact of discourse as OO has said, but we tell you specifically how you likely get them on our side. Thirdly, then we think that the movie was necessary to tell an untold story. Realize that on the comparative, if the movie was going to be discussed by Stevens, what you're actually going to have is the movie is going to confirm what people already know, right? That is particularly important because you need to realize the sanctity of going to initiation schools. Many people go there and they don't talk about what happened there, right? So the only thing they tell you is that like, oh no, we did like ABC, that's like whatever palatable and acceptable. We think that the movie that was going to be produced on government side would have confirmed already existing ideas. At the point where we have a movie being told by JT, you have an untold story being told because he's willing to talk to input controversial he's willing to input controversial takes or like I guess like unpopular subject matters around that specific topic. So we value untold stories being able to like reach us when it comes to that, right? More than party opposed. Okay, so that's it.
Sorry? Can you hear me? I should wait until it turns green. It's not working. Do I? Oh, what about?
Okay. Firstly, I'm going to engage with closing opposition's case. Then I'm going to weigh Dlomo's extension against the opening government case, and then I'm going to conclude by engaging with the opening opposition's material. Let's first start with closing opposition. So, unfortunately, a fair amount of their analysis on discourse, I think, comes from opening opposition already. But in terms of the things that I think were different, they were talking about like how you can still get benefits from this movie, even if people don't watch it. So I think that discourse is symmetric on both sides. The reason why is because the types of people that were having conversations about the internet are the types of people that felt the controversy happen, not because of the explicit scenes, but the very fact of the matter that the initiation is being discussed, is being shown in a movie, right? The fact is, initiation itself is a very secretive thing, right, in the Xhosa culture, and therefore the types of people that were involved in this discourse would similarly be involved even under our side, even though the movie is like more palatable as it were, right? The second thing they talk about here is controversy is being court to the movie. I don't think this is true, but in other words, like more of like a love story between the person, the initiate who goes, and the ikagat or the healer of that person. They have like a romantic storyline throughout. So the core part of the film wasn't just like, watching people's dicks get cut. Sorry for the graphic description there. It was more about like the dynamic that was established between that person and how that romance ended up falling out because of these cultural stereotypes. That would be the core element of the movie that wouldn't change either way. So I'm not sure why by removing the controversial scenes we're ultimately undermining the
purpose of that movie, we're still able to achieve that. Okay, now I want to rate the contribution that Zebediela provides over opening up government. So, opening government provides 3 contributions. Firstly, they talk about like Stephen Von Trengove becoming more accomplished. John Trengove is like less equipped to deal with the skills, to deal with the risks of depicting the nuances of his culture and how his future is founded. Why is Tiamo's extension better? 2 things. Tiamo gives you illustrations about the production process itself and the necessary skills you need to have in order to make a good movie. I think this is important because that determines the reach of the movie. It also determines the impact of the movie. Notice, if someone looks at a movie that is posted and it has like a really low score, like a really low review or something like that, it's very unlikely people are going to watch it, even if it covers some kind of controversial topic. And you want the movies to have an impact in order for you to make sure that these types of movies are made in the future. Right? This is important because remember, opening opposition and closing opposition want discourse. That's the goal that they want. But in order for that discourse to happen and to be sustainable, you want more of these movies to be made. The only way you can have more of these movies being made is if these movies have more impact. The way you can have more impact is by having these producers having competent producers making these movies. So if the long-term impact they want is that discourse, we concentrate that impact, it happens more under our context. So we're able to show you why long-term we're better in terms of the production process, and that's why we place it over urban government. Now I want to engage with urban opposition. So urban opposition basically has this dichotomy. They first say that like John Trengove is more authentic, is going to give you an authentic description here, whereas the commercial incentive for Stephen Von Trengove, and therefore that's going to undermine or dilute the nuances of the Xhosa culture, and that's going to be bad for Xhosa people in general. So firstly, the first response is, like, I don't think inauthentic portrayals are going to be the types of things that will happen on our side. Because inauthentic portrayals often harm commercial success. And if you're a producer, you know this, right? You're more likely to have an authentic experience because you want to avoid, for example, not getting awards because of your crass portrayals of these individuals. You want to avoid, for example, having bad reviews, or for example, not winning awards not winning important awards. Ironically, all of these things I'm describing are things that happened with John Trengove, and not things that we think would have happened with Stephen Von Trengove, right? So because of commercial incentives, you're likely to have a more authentic depiction, which requires for you to have all of those interviews with members of the communities and traditional healers. And people aren't going to watch your movie if they think it's racist, for example. So we think in the majority of the instances, we think these commercial incentives are instrumental to ensuring that the voices of Xhosa people are heard. Before I continue, open opposition.
You concede on your side that producers care about success more than the art. You think they're going to leave things out? Omission is being disingenuous to Xhosa people
So,
engage with that.
we think this is a false dichotomy. We think authentic portrayals will lead to success. We don't think it's a trade-off where in order for you to get success, you must now have an inauthentic portrayal. We're saying we get both under our side. Right? Then they say that, they say that people want controversy and the shock factor. And here I want to say, look, discourse is not like a good thing in and of itself, it's a means to an end. If the quality of the discourse is diminished, I don't think that's a good thing for their side. And I think the quality of the discourse was diminished. I mean, you guys remember when Kutama came out, a bunch of people were protesting in like Sturkina and cinema, and like they were voicing out a lot of homophobic things about Xhosa people and how like the culture is being diminished. I don't think this is the type of discourse that's conducive to queer acceptance, right? So I don't think their benefits of discourse even matter, because they don't even characterize the quality of this discourse. Is this the discourse that's likely to lead to more queer acceptance? Is this the kind of discourse that we want that's instrumental for having important conversations about changing the way masculinity is viewed in Xhosa culture? None of these things are analyzed from both of these teams, and therefore I don't think you should believe that they're achieving the impacts they want to. Before I continue, I want to take closing opposition.
Oyisa, this is an actor's motion. If Tshi doesn't have what money or winning awards, what value does the station have?
Okay, so the first thing is it's not an actor motion. You guys can look at the motion, right? We're arguing from a neutral perspective, not as John Trengove. Right? It doesn't say this was as John Trengove, for example. So from a neutral perspective, I think what matters more is the production of these types of movies, right? Because more of these movies being watched means that these movies have more impact. Having more impact co-ops the benefits they were talking about. We're not arguing as John Trengove here. We're arguing from a neutral perspective. Please read the motion. Okay, so the last thing I want to say in terms of why we're winning this debate, I have about 30 seconds. Firstly, I don't know what. Okay, I want to say thanks to Tiamo for speaking with me. It was really awesome. It's the first time I've spoken ever, and I think it was quite fun and quite challenging. We win this debate obviously because we are the ones that give you a comprehensive account of the production process and why necessarily Stephen Von Scher is going to be much better than John Trengove, and we give you illustrations and reasons behind why John Trengove's production was unsuccessful, why it ended up not having the impact. For those reasons, I think closing without mention in this debate.
Judging for a very long time in Iola for last year, and I actually felt out of love in debating. In the last two tournaments I've been to, SAUDC and this, I actually felt falling back in love of debating because of the circuit, but also because I think the people around it, Oyisa, Shannon, and the people that are around it, they actually make it worth it, right? So I really value the people in the circuit. Thank you for making it as it is. Yeah. Woo! 3, 2, 1. Community is so important. But I think what's also more important is the actual debaters can actually listen to our speeches. So one thing really important in our speech, I'll tell you 3 main things. Firstly, how does the conversation actually look like? Secondly, why is it so important? And thirdly, the untold stories. I want to tell you a quick story. Actually, in my school, I went to a school in the Eastern Cape. None of the captains were white, but they were Xhosa. Why was this? It's because none of the people on the team would respect someone who was not a man who went to initiation. So only when you got the word ta would they actually would they respect you. This is actually the same thing if you're a head boy within the Xhosa community or within the Eastern Cape. Why is it so important? Because the interactions with men, but the interactions with the other gender is so important, but also about race. Why is it so important in this debate? It's because within these spaces, you actually learn about how to be a man. This affects your identity. When you listen to Teddy's speech, he tells you something so important about recording untold stories about the impact it has. So where does it actually take place? We don't quite care it be like a Marvel movie and producing more money as soon as it can, but it actually talks about the same people, Tiamo, who actually gives so much of analysis about movies. Is we talk about him and going to have those discussions. So the very fact that Tiamo can tell us about these things is those very people who will go into these small movies and actually listen to it, and then have these smaller discussions within it. The reason why this is so important because I went to an interview in Eastern Cape where we talked about these spaces, but it was about a gender-based violence meeting, and we talked about where does all of this violence come from. It's about how you perceive yourself as a man and how that impacts the conversation. So where does the conversation therefore come from? It's when people are very controversial and talk about things. Why backlash is so important in society for having this conversation is when you talk about like hashtag men are trash, that impacts conversation, even if it is false or if it's like controversial. The reason why this is so important is that we want to have discussion. So it doesn't quite happen on like in clinical cinema when you're talking about people 60 years old, 50 years old. But it's about this. It's people like Tiamo who are those film students who interact with these material and then go to university to have these controversial conversations. Because that's where the impact happens. It actually also happens within debate spaces when we impact smaller children to come into these spaces and to talk about grievances. So the whole thing on government bench, when they talk about the impact, when they care about the impact and whether or not this person has some kind of success, they talk about the risk it has potentially, but the value of the artwork is far more important. What do we tell you therefore on our side? We tell you firstly, what is the value of this particular film? We tell you it's to record an untold history. When I watched the movie, Master Harold and the Boys, and talk about race relations, I cried at the end of it, even though it was created many years ago. So when we talk about like race relations and gender-based violence and where does it actually come from and then how it impacts society, I'm more likely to try to understand and actually unroll how do we actually correct these things, right? Because I'm interacting with it in society. And this recording of the untold story is so important, especially in 2017, the value value of it is when mothers actually thought about their children and wanted to know where they actually went or where they are. But more importantly, to understand like gender-based violence in South Africa, the importance of this is that there's a far larger impact on a ground level in the universities, but how children actually interact with it, and how men interact with it, and how women actually also interact with this conversation. But what is far more important about this same-sex relationship is because when you perceive yourself as a man, you therefore, and when you are within these spaces, you actually are affected by this toxic masculinity. And therefore, you aren't able to have those conversations to talk about your sexuality. When this is continuously told about you, this is what a man looks like, it's far more detriment to you. So when you question yourself within a student area, you're able to have better conversations, but you're also able to have this conversation, discourse about, look, I watched this film, and this is the impact it has on this same-sex relationship. It's so important in society, especially in South Africa, when we want to progress liberally, we need to be able to have this discourse, even if there's some kind of backlash. But we wouldn't tell you backlash is still important because people still engage with it. You tell that the importance of that intended speech. Yes?
Given how important you say these films are, don't you think it's a problem that he can't produce any more because John's film was not productive enough?
My guy, there's always going to be some kind of film. You, Tiamo, can probably make a film the next year. It's important. I don't understand your point, man. Why are you in the film industry if you don't think it's productive enough? I'm unsure, Tiamo. You watch small movies. The second thing over here is, what is the value of art? We tell you that it's particularly important when we show you an untold story, but it impacts society in some particular way that you cannot ever do it. So even on our side, even if it's sacred, because the backlash was like, the Xhosa culture is sacred and something that is secretive. The impact of it is when people interact with it and see what actually makes you, you. This is something very different from like Western cultures, where how people are uplifted and how people go living, and well, how people live and interact with their identity. This is like a key part of South Africans and a key part of the classic culture, which is part of the Eastern Cape. This is very different from any other culture in South Africa. If it was some other culture in South Africa that impacts identity, we want it because there's an untold story and it impacts people's lives and safety, and also how we see same-sex relationships. Therefore, we think this is a particularly invaluable thing because it talks about proximity of identity. It talks about long-term impact because we're able to understand why, or retrospectively, how do we actually, or how have we come to this particular point and understanding each other? Because South Africa is far bigger than just the Xhosa community. It's far bigger than just one community. It's about interacting with it and understanding it. Yes, definitely. Okay, so the third thing over here, you can tell me. Okay, the third thing over here is, what is therefore the value of art to an artist? In this particular impact here, is to create some kind of discourse. It doesn't matter whether or not the discourse has a large impact in terms of the amount of people it impacts, but the value of it. So the very fact that Tiamo watched it is very important because therefore he can have particular conversations that is important in his spaces. This is the same conversation I have when I interact with feminist icons or when I have conversations in gender-based violence places. It's because they interact with certain works and they're able to have intellectual discourse. This is the same discourse I'm having with you right now. The importance of it is that we are able to have value from it because it's controversial and we think about what is therefore the alternative. So therefore, what is the value of art to artists? If it can create some kind of, or give some kind of value to society in any way possible. In this case, we understand that that this particular person, John, took time to kind of understand this tradition and therefore wanted to talk about the impact it has on same-sex relationships. This is a direct impact that this particular culture has on your identity and how you interact with other people and your own identity. This is far more important, and this is very important for this particular actor. Thank you.